We begin this hour with COP28 summit in Dubai, where the Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa is taking a stand against what they see as fake climate solutions. CAPPA's Associate Director Aderonke Ige is part of a global group challenging the legitimacy of carbon credits. CAPPA and other environmental groups say these credits are putting efforts to cut emissions at risk. They argue that solutions like carbon markets create a false sense of action against climate change, while letting emissions continue, making global warming worse. Joining me now for more insights is the Associate Director, CAPPA, Aderonke Ige. Good to have you join us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I want to look at other issues, but first, let me ask you about this particular issue you're raising at COP28 summit. You've talked about you're taking a stand against what you see as fake climate solutions. I want you to speak to us more on that.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a long-standing issue. We've been saying over time that when we are talking about the issue of climate crisis or even carbon emissions, it is very unfair and unlikely that we get desired results if you keep bringing the same polluters, the same people who are doing harm to the climate, to the table to be the ones preferring the solution, i.e. corporations, global north governments, and so on. So some of the solutions that we have been seeing, that have been paraded over time would include carbon offset. You will hear about sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration, geoengineering, and so on. So what we have advocated instead is solutions that are community-driven. This knowledge must come from base. They must be tested scientifically. They must be proven. Because what we have seen is that most of the so-called solutions that have been brought to the table also, you will realize that they don't have any scientific basis. And then even places where, if you follow the statistics, you see where they have been talking about carbon market and so on. At the end of the day, it's just like giving a license to somebody to keep doing damage to the climate, and then some people are bearing the brunt, i.e. Global South, Africa, Latin America, and so on, while the same polluters who have been polluting just get like a slap on the wrist, and then the show continues as always. So that's part of the advocacy that we have been advancing, even at COP28 here in Dubai.
And because you mentioned Africa, civil society organizations in Africa advocating for Africa's adaptation needs to be prioritized at the summit. How optimistic are you that that will happen?
Thank you so much. In fact, from the texts that have gone on and the nature of the negotiation so far, you can see that there's still a lot of lip service paid to some of these things. And why do I say so? You know, at COP27, we scored what we call a point of loss and damage fund. That is on the one hand. And then a transitional committee was set up to be able to bring up recommendations and then, submit that to a board that will then take over and create a framework around it. Also, there's global adaptation financing, which has been a big issue here. And the reason it's a big issue is very simple. It's the same thing we are saying. So communities in the front line, especially where there's extractivism, where we are seeing a lot of impact of climate change, they are very vulnerable communities. And you can't talk about doing adequate justice without also talking about adaptation for those communities. But what we are seeing now is that there's a serious push from government of the global north to what I would call like escape, not even liability at this point. We've been talking liability for a long time, because what we have also continued to emphasize here is the fact that whatever financing mechanism or even fund we are talking about right now is not a handout, it's not charity that you are doing to Africa. There have been ages of ecological damage that have been done, and it's still going on. So to build resilience, to build adaptation in those communities, and then to mitigate. So those are the things we're even talking about, because otherwise we'll be talking reparations right now, which will be both finance and legislation and even litigation. So what we are seeing right now is that the body language, and led by the United States is really pushing against this. And we really hope that our people are seeing through, the charade. Because at the end of the day, like I was in the room today, we were at plenary, and good enough, civil society was also able to present positions. And what did we see? Colombia seemed to be the one country that spoke truth to justice of all the parties. we could speak, of course, as civil society.
And Ronke, that's what I want to pick up on next, because I was speaking to a climate change activist earlier in the week, and he was talking about how African leaders, as it were, are not, the kind of conversation they're advancing at that summit isn't beneficial for Africa. And I wanted to get your thought on that, because at the moment, we suffer the most from the effect of climate change, and we receive the least funding. What are the fundamental challenges?
Yes. Thank you very much. Very important question. So not only do we receive the least funding, we also suffer the most. We contribute the least and then least funding. So I would not like to make a sweeping statement, but I would say, even from the ones that I have heard, Zambia has been in the room, even Nigeria. So when we keep saying things like, oh, we'll sell carbon and we'll buy carbon, we will. So it makes it look like even our advocacy is counterproductive, because you have to be speaking the same language as your state. We are not supposed to be divided here. So there's the party and then there's the delegation from the civil society. But at the same time, we have just one common NDC, which is nationally determined contributions. But when you look at even the body language and even the verbal language of African leaders, sometimes I get really sad, because it looks like we are not really picking our battles effectively, and we are not picking our allies. And I will say something very quickly. The fact that I personally, honestly speaking, I'm not so much worried about the financing coming as I am about even the accountability of distribution of that fund. And that's one of the things we have been pushing also. We want to see a workable framework that would ensure that even when the fund comes, it goes to the communities that it is supposed to help or aid or support or get out of trouble. So we wouldn't want a situation where fund will come and then it will be story as usual. So those are the things we are trying to put in order here. And we're not trying to fight a battle that is endless. One of the things we also did was to propose certain recommendations. We've been dialoguing a lot, even before we left home, with our government, with the newly established NCCC, that's the Climate Change Council. So we've been having a lot of dialogue just to be able to see that we make a framework that is workable, that is community-driven and centered, so that it will not be stories that touch, even when we have a framework, the distribution of those finances. So those are some of the things we want to see here, and we have been working really hard and speaking truth to power as usual.
We'll see what comes out of this summit for Africa as we continue to follow the conversation. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I'm Associate Director of CAPPA, Aderonke Ige.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us once again. We'll keep you posted. Thank you.